Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. I'm a men's dating, relationship, and intimacy coach. I guide men to deeper relationships, deeper intimacy, and a deeper understanding of themselves and their emotions so they can connect with those they meet in their lives, both romantically and platonically, and even family. That last part really resonated me currently just because I just got off a coaching session with one of my clients and actually was really helping him connect more deeply with his father and his mother. But that's nothing to do with today's episode. Today's episode is really with a man who I really love speaking to, a man who I've known for a few years now. Really, when I started to get into this work, I came across him. I was recommended him by someone, and ever since then I followed what he's done. He's been on a podcast before. It's Eddie Elsey. He's a shamanic practitioner. He runs wonderful workshops and shamanic healings in and around London, as well as in the Midlands, where he's currently living. We talk a lot about shamanism, obviously. That's his expertise, that's his area of expertise, and we talk about it in the context of like how relevant is it for, living today and the lives we live now, as well as so many other things. We talk about his journey to being a shaman, which is really interesting, because his journey wasn't as I'm not going to say straightforward, but it isn't necessarily like, oh, he woke up and he was like super hippie and he wanted to be a shaman. It wasn't that. His journey was actually through his own pain, which you'll hear about. And we talk a lot about healing and what is healing and what healing gives you. And I think his definition is really beautiful. So I would really highly recommend at least getting that far. I don't know how, that's probably about 20 minutes or so into it. And he talks about what healing is to him. And as someone who does shamanic healings, I think he's probably really well versed in that as well. And we'll also talk about curing, like healing versus curing, which is two separate things. I think sometimes we overlap those two things a lot, and where we can find healing actually, and in what ways, and that maybe this will be a surprising answer that he gives there actually as well. So we look forward to that. We talk a lot about the shamanic process and what that is, and how how going into trance and how that works, and the science, some of the science behind that, and how that's come from different cultures and histories. He talks about some of the cultures that he visited as well, and it's just a beautiful conversation. I love talking to Eddie. He has a wonderfully calming and relaxing manner, and we talk a bit about spirituality and what is spirituality and what is not. And again, Eddie has a wonderfully down to earth way of saying some of these things, and I definitely will be using his definition of those two things actually going forward, because I really love those. Really enjoyed them. So before we get into the episode, I'll just let you know about what I've got coming up. I've got my men's program. It's an 8-week program running in June and July. You can still sign up. I'm having a few men come through now. So if it's something that sounds interesting to you, something you feel you benefit from, please reach out, because it's a really beautiful program. I'm going to go through a lot of really important parts of how we can be better men in this day and age, how we can show up better, got some wonderful modules around things like presence and awareness, how we can have deeper self-awareness and awareness of others, how we can be more deeply present, emotions, and the importance of feeling and letting go of emotions as well. We're going to do some processes around letting go of emotion, because I think as men, we do feel a lot. We're just not very good at moving those feelings, but we're very good at often suppressing them. And I know that is a generalization, but like I said, I've worked with men a long time now. And we're going to talk a lot about goals, as well as things like purpose, as well as, thinking of the last module, we're going to look at, praise and challenge and things like that. So there's some wonderful bits and pieces, and there's a lot of pre-work as well that goes into that. So be able to find all those details in the show notes if that's something that's interesting to you. So yeah, reach out, let me know. I'm really looking forward to running that, and there's still a few spots left for that if that's something of interest to you. So without further ado, I will let you get into this episode and enjoy, because it's a wonderful one. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Back with another episode, and back with a wonderful guest who I actually met quite a number of years ago. I think probably over 2 or 2.5 years ago. I followed him on Instagram and went to a couple of his workshops, and I remember going to a very dreamy drumming circle and sound healing way back in time in Hackney, with himself and another woman that was really beautiful. And today I have him, the guest I have him today is Eddie Elsey. Eddie is a shamanic practitioner. I know he likes that to be said, opposed to calling himself a shaman, or as I prefer to know him, is London's finest shaman. How you doing, Eddie?
I'm good. Nice to see you again. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, no, it's always a pleasure. I've always been following you keenly over the years.
Nice. Yeah, we were chatting off air that we haven't seen each other for a long time, so it's nice to connect again, even over Zoom. I mean, it's kind of the way to do it these days, but I'm thankful for it. I've done a lot of my work over Zoom in the last 2 years. Obviously, things have kind of opened up in the last 6 months, but yeah, I mean, people talk about Zoom fatigue, and I think that's definitely a real thing. But without it, I think things would have been a lot more difficult during the pandemic.
Yeah. It's funny because when the pandemic started, I was in my full-time job, and it was really the first time I'd really started to use Zoom there. So I started to use it quite a lot. So when the pandemic kind of hit and everything went on Zoom, I remember moving over an in-person talk I was going to be doing onto Zoom. And it was like figuring out rooms and participants and all that kind of stuff. But actually, it's been an absolute godsend to us, right? Like, I coach through Zoom. I imagine you do your shamanic healings as well through Zoom as well.
Yeah, it's bizarre how effective, I guess you'd term shamanism in some way kind of energy healing or spiritual healing, how effective it can be when you're not in the same room, country, time zone. It really blew my mind at first that it can be just as effective, sometimes more effective, because people are a bit more comfortable perhaps in their own space. Sometimes I would always prefer the intimacy of a face-to-face session, but yeah, I'm grateful for you having me on, grateful for this Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you to the technology gods for bringing us Zoom.
Yeah, well, Thor was god of lightning, so I feel like maybe he extends himself to the main socket. I don't know, but yeah, blessings to the laptop gods, I suppose, and goddess.
Thank God they blessed us. And yeah, before we get into what shamanism is and so forth, I think it'd be beautiful for the listeners, because often when we think of shamanism, we think of people dressed in robes and people that don't necessarily look like us and so forth. So it'd be really amazing to hear your journey to becoming a shamanic practitioner.
It's quite an alien thing in our culture, and yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because if you break down what shamanism is, which is it's essentially the use of an altered state to connect or commune with or work with the invisible world or spirit or whatever you would like to call it. Um, that's something that we don't see as either real or possible, or it's just not really in our Western mind frame. So I completely understand that it's seen as this kind of weird thing, and in a way, I enjoy that. I guess we'll talk about it later. My passion is really about finding a way that shamanism can fit into our modern lives without also sacrificing our modern lives. But my journey to it was through my own mental health. I mean, I struggled quite immensely with anxiety and OCD, especially, and that was leading to a lot of depression and helplessness. And I went down the route of psychotherapy. I mean, before that, went down the route of drugs and trying to kind of balance myself out that way, which it didn't work, funnily enough. And then I went into therapy, and it was good, but I didn't. It it, it was very enlightening. I wouldn't say it was very healing. I got a lot more understanding of myself, but I wouldn't say I was getting better. And but it started me on the path of looking at things differently. I came from a place where men didn't really talk about how they felt, which is quite cliche. It's like, how many men can say that? Probably, a lot of them. We didn't really talk about how we felt, didn't really admit to feeling vulnerable or weak. And I didn't really have anyone I could process the way I felt with. There was no one I could talk to about it, which made it worse, obviously. So therapy really helped that, because I had that for the first time, and I had a male therapist, and he was amazing. But I got to the point in therapy, and I remember saying to my therapist, like, "What now? Do we just keep talking about it?" And the way I saw my issues was, it was like this root issue, and it was almost like the issue in my psyche became a spotlight. And one week it was on something. I'm having relationship issues. Go to therapy for the next few weeks, talk about them, and process them. And then I come back and it moved to something else. Oh, now I'm having trouble at work. And then, oh, now it's family, and now it's back to relationship issues. And I was like, this is going to go on forever. The root issue is still there, and it's driving this. How do I get rid of that? And it didn't really. The therapist didn't really have too many answers. So I started looking elsewhere, and I tried yoga and Reiki, and it's all very weird things to me at that time, and they helped, and again, didn't quite. I wouldn't say they were healing for me personally. I know they are for lots of people. And then someone gave me a book on shamanism, and I read it, and I was like, wow, this stuff's interesting. It's like horns and mud and drums and like all-night ceremonies, and I was well on that, because I, at that point was running events with my friends and wanted to be a DJ, and it just was a bit closer to my life and the wildness that existed in my life that I enjoyed. So it fit a bit like a glove, and I got obsessed by shamanism, by this idea of it, and started reading all the books about shamanism and going to see loads of different shamans, and they were really underwhelming. Like, nothing happened. It's like, but I just liked the experience of it, and I really got obsessed about all the different cultures and the history and the there's shamanic cultures all over the globe, and they all go into these altered states, and some of them use hallucinogenics and some of them use drums, and there's a wildness to them, and it's like, and the actual shamans, the ones who are kind of the ringleaders to this experience, they're the craziest ones. I had been, exploring Eastern mysticism, where often the guru was like kind of this squeaky clean enlightened figure that, and I always felt very intimidated by that, because I wasn't squeaky clean. My thoughts were all over the shop, and um, and also kind of with the new age scene, I felt a pressure to be very polite and well behaved, and that made all my symptoms a lot worse. I suffered a lot from intrusive thoughts, which was like, if something's nice, it's like this voice, like, break it. And I was going mad, like literally mad. And shamanism allowed me to really release the pressure valve in a safe way, without the expectation that you had to be incredibly moral and incredibly um, pure, which was my way into actually becoming a lot more moral, because I didn't have the pressure around it. And eventually I found a shaman, a guy called Jez Hughes, an English guy who I really resonated with, and I trained with him for 4 years, 3 years quite intensively, and then another year less intensively. And that was about 7 years ago now, and I've been practicing full-time basically since I finished training with him, which was very, very lucky. And yeah, it's been an interesting path to integrate into modern living.
It's interesting, your journey, because it sounds like maybe if someone had presented shamanism to you before you'd stepped into therapy, you may have just looked at it and been like, I'm not sure about this.
100%. I was about as cynical as they come, and still staunch atheist. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'd heard of it. I think it's around this idea. It's not a new thing. This idea that some cultures have, they're called different things all over the place, but a witch doctor, for example, that's in our cultural psyche as something that's a bit funky, a little bit weird, a little bit different. These alternative healers that are quite wild. I knew they existed. I just never thought it applied to me. And before I started looking at things and looking for answers, and I mean, I guess I started looking for answers because I really needed them. So by the time I heard about shamanism, I was like, well, why not? I've got nothing to lose here, which was quite lucky because I was all ears at that point.
It's quite a receptive space to be in, because when it comes to healing, often people gravitate towards what would be the most comfortable for them or the easiest way of healing.
Yeah, rock bottom is a very fertile ground.
Become very open to something that might be difficult, might be hard, might be challenging.
Yeah, well, there's a saying in the army, which is, there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. And you're cowering from bullets and whatever else. You start praying and opening up to a higher power. And I've had no experience at war, and I don't mean to say that it's the same thing at all, but I was so unhappy, and my life in my own mind was so difficult, that it had got to that point where I was basically saying, if you're out there, I need your help. And yeah, if I'd have been comfortable in life, I would never have found this path. I would have had no need.
Exactly. And I'm interested in your definition of healing, because we see a lot about healing kind of banded around in different quarters. You know, I know you spend a fair amount of time on Instagram, as do I, and healing has become a whole industry in itself. But I'd be interested to hear what your kind of definition of healing is.
It's a really good question. For me, healing is about enjoying life. If you can enjoy life, then, and if you can experience joy, then that is healing. And I think we get confused about curing and healing. You know, my anxieties and my OCDs, they haven't disappeared. I haven't been cured, but I would say I'm healed because they don't bother me. You know, obviously when I go through very difficult moments, as we all do, and life is difficult and I get anxious about things, but in terms of what it used to be like, it's a different world. So I would say I've healed, but it's not the absence of these things. It's I've built my life around and over them to the point where they're just part of me. And that's healing. And that's available for everyone. Sometimes a cure isn't always available and it's not always realistic. And if we hold ourselves to those standards, we actually cut ourselves off a lot to the healing, which can be much slower and might not look the way that we want it to. And healing is always available, not just in, you know, in my line of work, it's not just available in ceremony or in ritual. You know, healing's available walking through Tesco or at the pub or at the football. I mean, especially at the football. But it's everywhere, all the time, and it's just about staying open to it. I tell people sometimes, because in our culture it's become this thing, like you said, this business and this drive and this obsession. I need to heal. I need to heal. I need to heal. And sometimes when we create that obsession, we spend too much time looking at life through the lenses of our sicknesses, if that makes sense, because that's what we need healing on. And if we're constantly looking for healing and obsessing over it, then all we're doing is keeping our wounds much closer than they need to be. So although healing is always available, I think as a culture would do us well to be a bit more loose and more playful with it as well, and to obsess over it less, and to have moments where you say, right, I'm going to do a bit of work on myself, and then moments where you say, actually, there's more work to be done. There always is, but I'm okay for now. I'm just going to enjoy life as I can and take a break from healing as well to recharge. That's kind of a rambling answer to your question, but
it's a beautiful answer, actually. For me, it was really a beautiful answer. So it's very simple. It's like healing is experiencing joy and enjoying life. Because as you said, I think often we see healing as the curing this wound, this problem, this thing that we have. But in fact, a lot of these, you know, wounds that we have or things that have occurred to us that still cause us trouble, we don't need them to completely be cured. We don't need them to disappear for us to actually live a fulfilling and happy and joyful life. We just need to find ways in which we can enjoy life, actually, while still having this exist in some capacity in us.
Exactly. If the only thing that gives us permission to enjoy life is perfection, then we're all doomed. Because even in the moments when you feel so aligned and so grounded and you know, like all of your stuff is just in the distance. Those moments are transient, they don't last forever. So what happens then? And also, you know, you do all the healing work in the world, heal all your past, all your ancestral lines, and then something goes wrong. Then what then? It's, you know, so we've got to have this expectation around healing that actually, when is enough to say, I'm good? You know, with all my bumps and bruises and limps, I'm okay. I'm still gonna open up to life, and that is what shamanism gave me personally. It allowed me to put myself back together, where I could look in the mirror and enjoy the person I saw, and that was a real gift, and that's why I decided to dedicate my life to it. You know, because I didn't think I had any hope, and it turns out, you know, I did. So healing is, yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And it's everywhere. That's something I literally wrote that down. It's like healing is everywhere, you know. Healing can be the way someone reacts to you in the street. Healing can be, you know, God, I'm onto football now. Healing can be, you know, your team
Always comes
reaching a
back.
cup. It always goes back to football with us. Your team winning a cup that they've never won before, you know, because and the healing there is this idea that it's not possible. And, you know, them reaching the cup final is this experience of like, actually I can enjoy life a little bit more. I can let myself be open a little bit more.
Yeah, so much about healing is permission. Giving yourself permission to move beyond a wound, even momentarily. And it's amazing how, as humans, we're not really wired, maybe just in the West, I don't know, we're not really wired to give ourselves that permission. It takes a lot of work, an incredible amount of energy often, and often suffering, to actually say, you know what, I deserve more than to be unhappy. And I find that interesting. And it seems to be across the board. Everyone I work with, it's like, you know, on a really simple level, and not to trivialize suffering and what people are going through, and I understand how difficult and complex it is, but on a really simple level, we heal the day that we decide we're healed. And that's a mountain to climb, but it's also incredibly simple. Again, I want to make sure that I'm not, I don't want to be confused with saying that we're cured the day we think we're cured. It's a completely different thing. But healing is different. So it's, you know, staying open to the life nourishing energy that's everywhere. We can access that whenever we decide that we feel worthy, essentially, which is permission we can give ourselves.
And I imagine in your work, it's you almost give people the space to give themselves the permission that they need.
Yeah, that's the aim, essentially, especially for the one-to-one sessions. You know, how can we map out your psyche in a way that you see the pathways which don't allow you to say, I deserve to be happy, I deserve to be anything I want to be in terms of emotions. And then it's about clearing those pathways, and laying everything out on the table so people can see it. Because often, you know, if you look at it, you know, I suppose as an analogy, it's like people come to the healings and their psyche is like a tangled ball of string, and everything's mixed up and everything leads into everything, and it's like just a jumbled kind of mess. And the healing process is just about bringing them out and bringing them out and bringing them out and saying that this is this and why this triggers this and it's potentially come from this, and it's not an exact science, but hopefully giving people a lot more clarity on their patterns, and then how actually they're a lot more than just their patterns, and then how to work with those patterns so they become nourishing instead of something that is draining, which in my experience anyway is often always the case. There's always a way that that part of you that you really want to get rid of actually holds the key to your gift and your healing, which is an interesting concept.
Because often we see these elements of who we are and we want to banish them, get rid of them, turn them into something else, ignore them, but actually in behind them there's some gold for us to kind of integrate into who we are.
Yeah, that seems to be the way. You think about it as I often try and do this with my clients. Like, think about that part of you that you at this point maybe even despise, the source of all of your pain, and now it wants to protect you from something. Let's just go with that idea. Especially in the first place, that part of you was birthed into existence because you experienced some kind of pain, either directly or indirectly. And this part of you sprang up because somewhere inside your unconscious, you decided you never want to experience that pain again. So it's on high alert. Especially people who suffer from anxiety seems to be the way. It's on high alert. Any situation that could potentially cause a similar pain, you're going to obsess over, think it through 24/7 sometimes. Ultimately, it's doing that because it doesn't want you to experience that pain again, but it's gone into overdrive. And ironically, because it's preventing you from actually being part of life, it's causing you a different kind of pain. And often you get people to, name that part of themselves. I'm saying, put yourself in that part's shoes. If your sole purpose in life was to protect someone and all they did was tell you how much they hated you and wanted you to go away, what would you do? Would you go away, or would you get louder? I'd probably get louder and give up another million scenarios why they should listen, and remind them constantly of the pain they went through. So often, a lot of healing is forming a relationship with that part, a very nourishing relationship where you say, okay, I understand what you're saying, and actually, instead of trying to get rid of you, actually, wow, you're probably there for me more than anything or anyone. And that, over time, tends to quieten that part down where you take control again. And then you can choose how much you want to open up to life without fear. Over a period of time, sometimes it can take a while because we've been in these patterns for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
To really let that land with myself, but also because it's like sometimes you want this instant healing, you want these spontaneous healings. You want to go somewhere and spend £25 and leave completely healed from everything. But actually the healing takes time because the way of thinking, the patterns that we have generated, they have taken time to be created and solidified. So in fact, the unraveling of these takes time and also an effort as well. I'm hearing it's like a conscious effort of choosing to respond and react differently.
Yeah, which is why it can't be taken too seriously, because you're going to trip up. And if every time you trip up, you think, oh, back to square one, it hasn't worked, I'm so weak, I don't deserve this, and all the shame and guilt comes in and completely flattens you, which is inevitable. You will trip. We're humans, and we trip. You know, how many times did you trip up learning to walk? It's a similar thing, and we have to take healing less seriously, and also life less seriously. And I know it's a difficult thing to hear for some people, and I completely understand why, but also try to take our pain less seriously. I don't mean to minimize anyone's suffering and say it's easy, because I understand it's really not. But if we can add humor and lightness and a bit of silliness to it, it tends to help. Because we're all pretty fucked up. Sorry if I can't swear, but you know, and that goes back right to what I said at the beginning about, you know, and I know you're amazing at this, getting men to share, getting men to just express themselves and to just be like, oh yeah, no, I really feel like this and that. And as soon as we hear someone else has gone through something similar or going through something similar, it's like, oof, we have such an individualistic culture that when we go through something, it's like it's we're the only ones ever that have experienced that, which is a massive weight to bear. You know, and when we start to understand that maybe our issues aren't the same but are a similar theme, suddenly that makes them a lot easier to carry.
It's this, we all kind of suffer from this idea that we are so unique, we are so special, we're so different from everyone else, that our pain is so unique to us that no one else is going to understand this. You know, no one else has ever felt like this through history. But in fact, maybe the truth is that we're not as special as we think we are. And actually our pain is very similar to everybody else's around us. It kind of comes through us slightly differently.
Yeah, exactly. And again, this is a really good point. When I say don't take things seriously, I guess I've concentrated on the negative things. Don't take the positive too seriously either. You know, when you're flying and things are going amazing and you're like, I've done it, I've cracked it. You probably haven't, in the nicest way. And to set the expectation that you have, you're gonna, when you do trip up, you'll probably fall from a higher distance. So it's about that balance and not taking either thing too seriously and not buying into both. When you're on top of the world, okay, I'm still just a normal guy. And when you're right at rock bottom, okay, I'm still just a normal guy. You know, and having that balance. But our culture doesn't praise balance. It doesn't see the excitement in the mundane or the balance. Everything's rock and roll, isn't it? It's like full throttle. So I find that difficult.
And I feel like it's almost slightly connected to something you said earlier around like gurus. We have this desire to kind of make people gurus or make people into some sort of perfect personification, whether that is within spirituality, but even in, let's go back to sport again. Even within sport, we have this idea, we look up to people and be like, my God, they're so amazing, they're so perfect, they're so brilliant. But that same cycle also drives a desire to kind of take people down, you know, like to knock them down a notch and to make them seem human. And it's almost like we also creating that same cycle within us towards ourselves, that if we are doing well, we're like a bit scared to actually even acknowledge things are going well.
Yeah. Celebrity culture, I think, you know, for many reasons, perhaps, that we enjoy it. But one of the reasons I think is, especially when we have our idols, it gives us hope. We project beautiful things onto them. And when, you know, on some level, they don't live up to that, take it as a personal attack. And you can be similar with gurus. We project too much onto them, and I don't necessarily think it's the guru's fault, as they're just playing their role. But people latch onto them as a way to have reflected back at them perfection. And, inevitably the mirror cracks. You hear about it all the time. Gurus, I was going to say making mistakes, but they're not. They're just being human and being like everyone else. They're not doing anything wrong. But because of this aura, that again, isn't their fault, that gets projected onto them by other people, suddenly they're the bad person. Same with celebrity culture. And then we try to tear them down because, like I said, the mirror cracks. We don't like that. We always want to be reminded of beauty. Don't like it when anything other than that is paraded around in front of us.
And do you feel that in some ways because we're searching for the beauty we would love to see inside of us, but it's easier for us to recognize it outside of us than it is to look in the mirror and see it in ourselves?
I think that's part of it, definitely, yeah. Because we don't know these people. It's like, going back to celebrities, you don't know them. You've most likely never met them. Maybe you have for 5 minutes. You don't know what they're like at home, when they're stressed, when they're late, when they're, all of this stuff. But you know who you are all the time. You know what you're like in the morning, at night. You know what you're like on the toilet. You know what you're like when you don't have any money or you're blind drunk. So it's completely ridiculous comparison. You compare the very best of that person to your entirety. It's just not a fair race. And I suppose it's the same with the gurus. And it's again what drew me to shamanism, because there's some of that exists, especially in the more kind of neo-shamanism culture, where these shamans are kind of really put on a pedestal. But generally, they're just like everyone else in these traditional cultures. There's nothing inherently special about them, and they don't like it when you act like they are special. And I liked that. It made me feel a lot more comfortable. I didn't really feel comfortable in spiritual circles before that.
I know from maybe past conversations and some stuff I've seen you post before that you actually traveled to other cultures to experience shamanism in other lands. I remember is it West Africa you went to?
I've been to Senegal a couple of times. I visited an animist culture there. Shamanism comes from animism. Animism is the belief that everything has a spirit, everything. Me, you, animals, trees, mountains, rivers, but also thoughts and sicknesses and desires, everything, beliefs, everything is alive on a spiritual level. And animism is a culture that prescribes to that belief. And shamanism comes from animism, which shamanism is an animist culture where someone from that culture acts as the middleman or middlewoman between those spirits and the culture. So, strictly speaking, not all animist cultures are shamanic, because not all animist cultures have a dedicated shaman. But all shamanic cultures are animist. So they're very similar. And yeah, I went to visit an Iwo, they're called the Iwo tribe in Senegal. Didn't get to spend much time with them. But I haven't done too much traveling. I mean, we are so lucky to live in a country where you go to an authentic indigenous ceremony every month. But I'd love to do more. I really want to go to Mongolia. I really want to go to Mongolia and experience shamanism out there. I've seen Mongolian shamans at work before, and yeah, it's a sight to behold.
I was lucky enough to visit Mongolia years ago, but I don't remember engaging
Really?
any shamans there. And I actually have a friend that he's Mongolian. He lived in London for a while. Now he's back in Mongolia. But I was unaware of shamanism in Mongolia until you just mentioned it.
I think it's the main religion.
Really?
I could be wrong, but I think it's there's definitely having a revival in it, and it was considered the main religion, and but there was the Soviets tried to wipe it out, but it's big there. I mean, they've got a very vibrant shamanic culture, and they don't use any plants or anything. They just use the drum, which is what I do, the way I was taught. So I'd love to spend some more time with them.
And it's interesting you say, you're a lover of the drum, and I've been lucky enough to experience your beautiful drumming. And you, if I remember rightly from the conversation we had, it's almost as a way of taking people into an alter state, into a trance state.
Exactly. So shamanic cultures from all over the world, what connects them is this use of an altered state. And the shaman's job really is to master the other worlds, and opening up what's called a hollow bone. They become a hollow bone, and they invite the spirits that they work with into their body, and then the spirits take them over. And the drum is the vehicle for that. There can be a rattle, some cultures clap and dance and chant. Anything repetitive over time lulls the shaman into an altered state, but it's a state that's available, that the shaman can bring other people into that state as well, which is what we do at the dreaming circles. And through drumming, surprisingly not for that long, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, with the intention, and if you set up the space right, you can really bring people into some very deep dreams. And within shamanism, dreams are taken very seriously. In our culture, it's seen as maybe you made it all up, or it's just your imagination. In shamanic culture, it's not really seen like that. It's seen as it's real in a different way, maybe a symbolic way, maybe literally, maybe not. But what happens in that dream reality has bearing on this reality. And so the shaman's job is to kind of go in and manipulate this reality by working with the altered or alter reality, different reality. And the drums are an amazing way to do that. Can sometimes be more difficult than taking ayahuasca or peyote, and can take a little bit longer to really go into that full-blown kind of medicine trance, but it's definitely possible and available to people.
And by going into trance, that allows people to process through healing that's necessary for them, or for them to see things that is beneficial to them.
There's a few reasons. The first reason, speaking for me, the first time I went and was led on a shamanic dreaming, what overwhelmed me was the connection I felt to something bigger than me. This kind of undeniable feeling that there is more. It didn't have a face, or didn't say anything, or it wasn't particularly visual. It was just this experience of temporary oneness, I suppose, which was incredibly powerful for me, because I was like, right, I don't know what it is, but there's something, and that means you know, that means what I thought to be true is probably false, which means maybe I have a chance at healing because there's an entire world available. You know, another reason is to process quite traumatic events. Sometimes to look them directly in the eye is overwhelming and really overwhelms our nervous system and our psyche. Through the dream state, it often comes a bit more symbolic, but the process is the same, or the way we process it is the same. So we can look our biggest fears directly in the eye in a different way, which allows them to be processed and transmuted, which can be very beneficial as well. And then on a physical level, when you go into a trance, a lot of energy comes through your body, which clears you out. Kind of can, especially in the more active ceremonies we do, where we're dancing around a fire for hours or drumming for hours, you build up this power, and it sort of it dislodges a lot of energetic blockages from you, and when power comes through you, it can be very cleansing. Those would be the three main reasons. It's also pretty fun, I think, to dance around a fire in the mud for a few hours. But yeah, in the studios, in the dreaming circles, they're a lot more passive, a lot more, hopefully a lot more relaxing. Depends.
I remember being, I think it was over in Aho, and it is very relaxing. It's amazing how a drum, because it's just this very not everyday item, but I grew up going to church, so like drums and things like that were very common to see, but you never thought of a drum as something that could really take you into a state where time starts to kind of dissolve away, and you're not really sure how long you've been somewhere, and you leave feeling super relaxed, and you've had these visions, of things maybe from your life or something bigger, as you explained. It's quite a magical experience to have.
Yeah. Well, there's the spirit element of it. Before we drum, we call in the spirits, and then the drum continues to do that, and that brings I always say it makes the air fuzzy, and it adds that quality. If I'd have just stood up and drummed, maybe it would be similar, but I doubt it. It's both things. There's lots of ingredients to ceremony, and all of them together create a new whole, and it's that which is very different, I think. Takes you to an alternate reality.
And I remember seeing you post something recently, is these days you can go to things, there's many things that are shamanic now,
everything's shamanic now. Yeah, I mean, I've softened my stance on this a little bit, because I remember my teacher saying the shamanic techniques are quite simple. The techniques, the kind of nuts and bolts of what to do to make something shamanic is simple, but it's what you bring into the space. So it's like, okay, this is how you would call the spirits, and it's like steps 1 to 5. But if you haven't spent the time and the work actually forming relationship with the spirits, you're not calling anything in. So technically you're not doing anything shamanic, but you are also doing something that looks the same. And because so many, for the vast majority of time, unless very rarely you actually can see spirits, which, it's not going to happen every time. A lot might happen once in your life. No one knows the difference. But I don't want to be that guy sitting in the corner grumbling about it. No, so people can do what they want, but it's, you know, you can learn shamanic. You become a shamanic healer technically in 2 days. But what are you bringing in? How have you formed a relationship with these spirits, and do you know them intimately? And then how do you bring them in? That's what takes years, years and years and years, and there's no substitute for that. You know, indigenous shamans train for 5, 10, 20 years, and they're born into a culture that believes this stuff from birth. I find it hard to believe that someone who's born into our culture, who has to learn about all these belief systems, B, unlearn everything that tells you they're not true, can do a weekend workshop and do what indigenous shamans can do. Maybe they can. I don't, you know, I don't see it, but I try not to get worked up about it anymore. But the thing that does work me up is that maybe once a month, less now, weirdly, but once a month I'll have do a one-to-one healing for someone who's gone to a ceremony that hasn't been held right. It's often a medicine ceremony, a Westerner holding an ayahuasca ceremony, and it's really messed them up, and they're like on the edge or in psychosis because of it, because it's too powerful. You know, they've been plugged into the mains, and it's blown them apart, and that's what I find it, you know, a shame. But that can also happen in an indigenous ceremony. You know, it's not the safest path, because there's an element of wildness and risk and danger that cracks the human psyche enough for it to heal, and it's a fine line, but that only comes with experience as well, and not running before you can walk, and not doing ceremonies which you can't hold, and not bringing in energies that are too powerful, because it's inevitably going to go wrong. It's like, you know, getting in the cage with a lion. You don't, if it turns on you, there's nothing you can do, and that can often happen.
It's quite popular now to, you know, head off somewhere in the UK, even Europe, and do an ayahuasca ceremony with someone who is not a kind of shaman of lineage, just, you know, in someone's house, in someone's bedroom, maybe even on your own. And it's quite I guess for me, as someone who has done ayahuasca with shamans even in Peru, I find this like quite surprising that people are really open to I want to say put their life in someone's hands, but it is, you know, you're stepping into quite an arena that you don't really understand, with some people who may not really have been trained to hold that sort of energy and hold that sort of space.
Yeah. Thing is, one of the problems is the medicine, ayahuasca or peyote or even mushrooms, the medicine is so intelligent that 99 times out of 100 people are going to have an amazingly healing experience, no matter who's holding the ceremony. But it's that one time out of 100 where there's this perfect storm, where someone's not psychologically ready, and the medicine is too powerful, and the setting isn't right, and they've had a difficult journey there, and it's too much to process. That is when the expertise of a person who is married to the medicine can come in and merge with the medicine and put that person back together. You know, and that really takes a master to do. So, you know, people, it's like Russian roulette. You know, people are gonna, you know, you could spend your whole life doing ayahuasca ceremonies in the bedroom with your mate. Maybe you'll be fine. Maybe it'll be amazing. But it's that one time where you could crack, where you want someone there. So it's difficult. You know, it's impossible to please. I would always say, do your best to go indigenous with the people that have been brought up with the medicine. But even that can be a bit of a minefield. So, like I said, it's every time you step into the spiritual arena shamanically, you're taking a risk. And that's the reality of it. I mean, I probably shouldn't say this on the podcast, but ringing up an insurance company and trying to get insurance for a sweat lodge is like, it could be a sketch. It's like, yeah, right, what are you going to do? Yeah, we're basically all going to get either naked or in our swimming trunks, and then we're going to dance around a bonfire. They're like, right. And they're like, right. And then after a few hours, we're going to heat big rocks in a bonfire till they're red hot. And we're all going to get in a pitch black kind of wooden cave. And there's a pit in the middle. And we're going to sit there. And then we're going to bring in these red hot glowing massive rocks with a garden fork and put them in the middle. And we're going to close the door so it's pitch black. And then we're going to put water until steam comes out. And like, we obviously can't insure you for that. So shamanism is inherently too wild for this culture. So, you know, it's just one of those things. And if we try to make it well behaved, you're going to lose the edge and lose the power, and that would be a shame too, because, you know, in traditional cultures, they've got a lot less red tape. You know, and unfortunately, or fortunately, who knows, we have a lot of red tape. So to really get that authentic experience, you have to take a risk. So it's a difficult one.
And I'm interested because I know you speak often about spirituality and maybe you've never used these words, but the consumerist nature of spirituality, which we're now sold and advertised through Instagram adverts and Facebook ads. And I wonder what your thoughts on is, like, where did spirituality start to really go wrong in this Western world that we live in?
Well, I think humbly 90% of people in the spiritual industry have it wrong. I think spirituality has to come from inside a culture. Any traditional indigenous culture, their culture came before their spirituality. Spirituality was birthed from their culture, and because of that, it serves their culture. The problem we have in the West is we've taken all these spiritualities from other places, and instead of looking at them as just pure techniques, we've looked at them as dogma or doctrine, and we've tried to actually bend our society to this spirituality, which is why the New Age can be quite cliquey and culty. And you know, when you first get into spirituality, it's like, well, I can't live in London, can't live in Birmingham, can't live with other people that don't agree with me. So I want to go and live, you know, somewhere where there's only people like me, which defeats the whole point. So I think traditional cultures and spiritual cultures are incredibly generous with sharing what they have, but it should be inspiration rather than something we copy and paste into our culture, because it's not going to work. Our culture is so different on essentially every level. So we need to really look at our culture and everyone within it and say, what spirituality are we going to birth that supports everyone? You know, there's always going to be this element of consumerism because it's a service. But at the moment, it's a service for quite privileged people. And it needs to be something that actually is in service for absolutely everyone, no matter where they're from. And it needs to be a lot more down to earth to do that. It needs to be a lot more mainstream in the way that people are able to express their spirituality. That's why I started street spirituality, not because it's like from the hood, just to bring it to street level. You know, as I went on my journey, all my mates couldn't care less about spirituality and shamanism, and they were like, well, I can see how it's helped you, but I could never go to a ceremony, or I don't want to be a hippie, or I don't want to do this. Like all of this taboo around it. And it was like, wow, there's so much taboo is the right word around being a spiritual person. And it doesn't need to be that way. So I think the spiritual culture in the UK really needs to take a look at itself and say, actually, am I, with my spiritual work, could I help the least spiritual person in my community? If the answer is yes, great. If the answer is no, then that's where I think we need to look.
Because otherwise we kind of have stepped into a place where it's like spirituality for the elites, you know, for those who are moneyed and can afford it. And if you cannot, then, well, you know, I can't help you.
Yeah, or it becomes very dogmatic. And it's like, well, do you believe in this? And do you believe in this? If you do, come along. If you don't, screw you. It needs to be available to people whether they believe in spirits or whether they don't. In traditional cultures that I've experienced or that I've researched over the you know, for a long time, and also our cultures that were here, the Norse culture or the Saxon culture or the Celtic culture, which we don't really know much about, but for the everyday person, there was superstition, really. They didn't have personal relationships with deities. That was the shaman's job. They provided the service. But they lived in connection to something greater than themselves, and that's what brought them healing. And I think the spirituality is like, well, how much do you pray to this God in our culture? Talking about like how well do you know the spirits? How and for the everyday person, it's unnecessary. And it's like, I think we need to move more in that direction, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So making spirituality, as you said, something accessible to all, whatever their beliefs, in a way that can help them in their lives.
Yeah, and in whichever way they want. You know, shamanism is interesting because it's based around an altered state. How many things in our culture exist around an altered state? Loads. Absolutely loads. Underground music scenes, the kink scenes, football. You know, you think about football, we're sitting in a circle singing songs. It's like any ceremony I've ever been to. Generating energy, you know, and there's so much in our culture that's already ritualized that if we forget about the word spiritual and what isn't, and actually just look at the real building blocks of ritual and ceremony, it's everywhere. So it's just turning our perspective to actually, I don't need to become anything. I already am inherently spiritual because I'm alive. What in my life nourishes me? Great, I'm going to honor that. And there you go.
That's it with spiritual, because the word spiritual conjures up images of like meditating for hours and wearing certain clothes and not wearing certain clothes and talking about certain subjects being beneath you to talk about, that sort of thing. What I'm hearing from you is like, actually, is to bring a certain level of, I'm going to use the word sacredness, to what the rituals we already have and partake in. You know, going to football, going to work is a ritual for a lot of us. We get ready, we leave the house, we do something, we take various steps all the time to get there. Or even going to a rave, there's a ritual to it, you know. There's an energy build up. There's, you know, maybe going to a kink party. There's a ritual to it. There's rules. There's a space. There's all these things. Is actually seeing those things as nourishing and seeing those things as inherently spiritual allows us to accept the spiritual nature of ourselves and what we partake in.
Yeah, that's an amazing way to put it. Accepting the spirituality in life, in everything. And that doesn't mean it needs to be taken incredibly seriously and everything becomes sacred in the way that we're taught sacred is, you know, which is maybe white robes or really clean or really pure. It can be that, but it doesn't have to be. And it's slightly different to, you know, real quite purposeful healing spaces and healing times and stepping into ceremony, and that's a slightly different thing. But daily life can be nourishing in a way that it's currently not seen in our culture. And I think you can build spirituality into something you already do easier than trying to drop what you actually enjoy and becoming this spiritual version of yourself that maybe limits you a lot. When I kind of got into spirituality, I was kind of bouncing around the New Age for a bit, and I could never really say what I wanted to say. I could never really be who I wanted to be. I bought different clothes, and I like lots of people changed their name, and I felt pressure to do that, and I'm not hating on it. It's not necessary if you don't want it to be. Some people enjoy that, and more power to you. But if you don't, and you don't vibe with it, then it doesn't matter. You can build something spiritual around anything, just like they have.
Yeah, and it makes me laugh because in a way, through the work I do with like dating and relationships, a lot of the things that's said by people, especially the people I speak to and work with, is like, oh, I want to find someone who's spiritual. And I've always found that an interesting term, only because I don't know if I would necessarily class myself as someone who's inherently spiritual, I guess. But we have this idea of what spirituality looks like in another person. And if it doesn't conform to our idea, then they are not it.
Yeah, and often what they want is someone who's maybe a little bit more understanding, maybe a little bit more patient, maybe a bit more open to certain ideas, and that's fair enough. I've met plenty of spiritual people who are not those things as well. So it's like become this kind of almost this creation on its own in the West, spirituality, and it has these connotations. And I think, I find it interesting to flip those connotations upside down and challenge people's perceptions of what actually is spiritual, what actually maybe isn't, if anything isn't. And that's an interesting conversation to have, and that's where I'm very passionate about taking this view of spirituality and different events we run, and trying to find something for everyone where they go back to permission, give themselves permission to be connected, to be open, and to not feel like they can't because they're not perfect.
I guess in all this conversation, the question I didn't actually ask was, what is spirituality to you?
To put it really simply, I think spirituality is the act of praising life. That's not my idea, that's an idea that lots of traditional cultures have. It's about praising life, their ceremonies and their rituals. And I love that idea because it really makes things simple. And how many ways are there to praise life? Countless. And it's a very personal thing. How do you praise life? And anyone listening, we'd all come up with different answers, and how beautiful is that? And how silly would it be to say this is how you're meant to praise life? So that to me is what spirituality is, and that's why it's available for everyone, and that's why we're already doing it in so many ways. And if you're sitting there thinking, wow, I find it so difficult to praise life, maybe that's the beginning of a journey. Because if I look back to where I was when I was suffering a lot, the one thing I wasn't doing was praising life. I was doing the opposite. And when I started to feel able to praise life, it's like my healing snowballed and got faster and faster and faster. And I started to actually hear beauty and then see beauty all around me. I hadn't gone anywhere. And that was an amazing thing. So that's what I'd say spirituality is.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Praising life. I really like that definition, as it gives so much space and room for what spirituality is, instead of spirituality being, I don't know, some people may say it's a connection to something higher, or a set of practices that are, incredibly sacred to you. And actually it's just like everything that you choose to nourish you and enjoy through life makes you a spiritual being. And it kind of creates a relaxation in the body, like, oh actually, yeah, I can do this spiritual thing. I think I know how to do this.
Yeah, and that spaciousness is that's exactly what it is. That spaciousness and freedom and feeling loose and playful. That's surely what living is about. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, that's how I want to live. But that's because when we're not like that, when there is a doctrine to follow too heavily, and when we confine ourselves too much, which sometimes, I remember we've had the chat before about you need discipline as well. You can't have pure freedom. That actually works against you. So it's like, you pull it tightly and then you let it go. You put it tightly and let it go. And we need both. But that feeling of freedom, which funnily enough is often achieved by some form of discipline, especially in our thoughts. That's when a lot of tension drops away and a lot of healing can occur.
Yeah, and I see that even through the work I do as a coach. Is like, we can let go of a lot of the thinking we have about ourselves mainly is where we do a lot of thinking about. That there's room for other things. There's room for us to see the beauty, the joy that exists in our lives. Okay, so before we finish up, we've got a lot of questions from Instagram, so I'm going to fire them at you. Okay. Yeah, short answers. So
let's go.
The first question is, what role could shamanism play in climate change?
A big one, I think, but speaking realistically, I don't think it will. So shamanic cultures, obviously traditional cultures, not just shamanic ones, but any traditional culture, they live in much more balance with the earth because they have to. It's usually yearly, and a lot of the shamanic rituals are to do with making sure the rains come, making sure the sun shines, making sure the food grows. So they live in a much more personal relationship with the earth, with their food, with their water. That's something we could 100% learn from. So I think it could play a huge role. Will it? Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to become a shamanic culture in the time it takes to tackle climate change, which is a very pressing matter. So it's bittersweet, I think. If we all existed with more of a mindset of traditional and indigenous cultures, I think we wouldn't be in this issue. But the reality is we don't, and it's going to take a lot more than that, I think.
Next question. Is it true that Turf is a feline overlord brought to Earth to start a cat rebellion?
I feel like I know who sent that, but I don't know. I don't know what they're talking about. No, I no comment. I think they mean Truff, which is my cat. That makes more sense. Yeah. And in that case, yes.
In that case, yes. Okay, good to know.
But they should learn her name.
Yes. Do shamans perform better in the bedroom?
Because I haven't given an answer yet, it actually is like I'm thinking about it, but I'm actually wondering who would have said that. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm not going to say no. I'm going to shoot myself in the foot. Yeah, of course.
Next question is, what is your favorite thing to give as an offering?
The most common thing I give is oats because it's easy to have a bag. They're, you can buy them anywhere, basically. They're cheap and they have a cultural meaning for this land. And because of that, my ancestry. Some people use tobacco. I don't smoke, so I have no relationship with tobacco. Yeah, and fruit. I give a lot as well when I have it if I'm at home. But and burying coins as well. Oats, coins, fruit. Most regular thing that I give. Candles.
Are there candles? Yeah. Candles. Are there any sacred places in the UK that you still like to visit?
There's loads of sacred places in the UK. There's loads of sacred sites. They hold a lot of power, but I prefer to visit local places that I formed my own personal relationship with personally. It's much easier. But there's something incredible about the sacred sites and all their mystery. We don't really know what they were used for, but they're very old. I mean, Stonehenge wasn't even built by the Celts; it's built by the people before the Celts. So these are ancient places that, we have no idea why they're there, even how they're there, really. So that mystery is incredibly intriguing. And lots of the stone circles are the same. But yeah, local places I would always recommend doing also.
Perfect. And the last question is if spirit is so powerful, why is Tottenham still so rubbish?
Because, they haven't allowed anyone to come into the ground and give offerings. That's why they don't work with anything, and I've tried. And I will continue to try. Leicester won the league that year. They were flying in Buddhist monks to bless the training ground and the pitch. And they also uncovered the King Richard's bones in the car park. The stadium's called the King Power Stadium. In South America, they regularly have shamans come on the pitch, or they have shamans that aren't allowed to watch the football because they influence the game too much. So at this point, Tottenham really have nothing to lose by hiring me. So, watch this space.
Are you planning on being the official shaman for Tottenham Hotspurs as well?
Mate, if you talk about dream jobs, that would be one of those moments, probably the only moment where I'd probably say I've made it. I've done it. That's it. This is the pinnacle. So yeah, hopefully one day.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for being a wonderful sport with those questions. But I'm sure after listeners have heard so much about you, they'd love to hear, how they can work with you, if there's any workshops or courses that you're going to be running in the near future.
Yeah, we're doing a retreat in September. I haven't announced it yet. It's me and a guy I work with called Dave is one of my teachers. I'm incredibly lucky to work with him, a guy called Dave Marriott. One-to-ones are kind of the only thing that I'm doing at the moment. I'm taking a break from other retreats and courses until September. So Eddie Elsey on Instagram or streetspirituality.com online. Get in touch. I'd love to chat. And yeah, love to work with whoever wants to delve into shamanism.
Yeah, and I'd say I'm lucky enough to have been to a few of Eddie's ceremonies and rituals. And they're wonderful, beautiful occasions. Very much enjoyed. I've really enjoyed it. I've been to a number, actually, I think about it now. And I've always, the shamanism is a beautiful way of healing. So it's a different way to come at it from non-normal, like you said, therapy and so forth. So it's something that you're interested in. It's really worth following the calling to try something different, because often when we let go of this preconceived ideas of how it needs to be, there's some magic there for us. There's some gold for us on the other side of that.
Yeah, and I love working with people who never had any spiritual experiences before, as well as people who have. But if you feel a bit weird about going to a spiritual event, or it's completely out of something that you would normally do, or you and your mates would normally do, amazing. And they the events I run are kind of designed to support that, because that's exactly the place I came from. So yeah, don't let that get in the way of it. That's what I would say.
Totally agreed. Well, thank you, Eddie. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being so generous with your knowledge. I'm sure the listeners have thoroughly enjoyed today as much as I have as well. It's always a pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah, lovely to be on. Thanks for inviting me, and hopefully we can do this again at some point.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for listening. It'd be great to hear from you. I'm sure me and Eddie would love to hear what you've learned from today, anything you've taken, anything you've changed or shifted in your life. Please reach out through Instagram or email or website, however you prefer to. But until next week, ciao, ciao.